Want to begin? All right. Ladies and gentlemen,
Please,
it's my pleasure to introduce you one of the true greats of the cartoonist and comics industry, as well as a dear friend, Mr. Sergio Aragones. Sergio,
hi
thank you for
guys.
joining us.
Always a pleasure to talk about our lives and what we like and what we do. Yes.
Uh, Thank you. Um, I guess to begin our time together, can you tell us what kind of training you had to prepare you for your work in your profession?
None. I grew up in Mexico. I was born in Spain, but I grew up in Mexico, and I got magazines from Spain, from Argentina, from Mexico, and I love cartoons. I went to see a lot of animated cartoons in the movie houses because there was no television then; it didn't exist. Uh, and the comics that arrived to Mexico from the United States, the only ones that I liked were the ones appropriate for my age. I love the Donald Duck stories, Little Lulu, and but superheroes never attracted. I was never attracted to them. Um, I was more of a reader of books, Tarzan, uh, um, not that much science fiction because of my era. What was popular were pirates, and that was it. Pirates and cowboys. Science fiction wasn't that strong for us to Mexico, and the translation of the American comics were pretty bad by then. So, on the Mexican comics, I read them, but I never thought of it as being a cartoonist. It never occurred to me. I was just a kid loving to read and drawing. I was always drawing, copying the comics, and watching animation in the movies, and then I go home and I try to draw the things that I saw. Eventually, I went to high school, and what attracted to me was jokes, humor. The comics has been a child stage. And then when I grew up a little, I was more concerned about humor. I love cartoons. I love to laugh about them. And I could never read. I used to go when I was already a little older. When I started, I'm talking in the 50s in high school, studying high school, I will go with some other cartoonist guys that also like to draw. We went to a hotel that sold foreign magazines. And the ones I understood were the French because they didn't have words. And some of the European cartoonists didn't have any words. I never could understand Americans because I didn't speak any English. And the British, forget it, like Punch magazine, they was totally behind my head. I couldn't understand a word of it. So I was, from the beginning, trying to do cartoons without words. Never dream about drawing comics or all. I will draw my own little stories because I will tell stories to my friends orally about the adventures and things, when in school. But never entered my head that I was going to be a cartoonist. I just loved to draw cartoons. And in 1954, I was on the first year of senior high. We had a newspaper in the school in Mexico that was a mural newspaper because we used a thing called mimeograph, who was a pain on the butt to work with. So we had the cartoons on a board, and I would draw cartoons without words and that. And one of my editors, who was another girl in the class, said, "You should sell them. They're very good." And I said, "No, please, no, I'm not good." So she took him to a magazine called Haha, and they bought him. So she comes to them and says, "Hey guys, Sergio's inviting us for lunch now and to go bowling." Says, "What are you talking about? I don't have any money to do that." Says, "Yes, you do. You just sold some cartoons." And that was the beginning, So I started drawing cartoons. and but I was more into reading and looking at things and doing. I was rowing and diving. I love sports then, it was, but slowly, when I entered college, I studied architecture. I was doing a mural newspaper for the college also, doing cartoons. And I think that's what helps to become fast at cartooning. Because I sat there in the mornings, like Monday, and there was a line of guys telling me what was happening in the school. So-and-so teacher is not coming because he's sick. So we'll draw a very cartoon about the guy being sick and pretending to be sick or fishing on the thing. And says, he's not sick, he's fishing on the river, things like that. So they will tell me, there's a football game between our school and engineering. So I filmed the whole board and we put it there, and it was a weekly mural newspaper of what was happening all week cartoons. So that was fun. And it was done with the old-fashioned markers that you have to open them and fill them up with a little bottle, like if they were a lighter, And that was a marker and fast because I had to do them before I went to class. And that's the beginning, man. That was it, but no training whatsoever.
All right. Well, you actually, I think you answered my second question, which is how you got your start in the industry.
That was it.
Yeah.
The real start was when I came to the United States, because I started working in Mexico. I had a weekly page in one of the leading magazines, a weekly one, but that doesn't pay enough. And I was never thinking of making a living out of it. It was fun to have money for coffee and taking a girl out and things like that. But I was going to be an architect, because when you are a son of an immigrant, immigration has to prove that it's worth it. You leave a country that is in trouble and you want to make it better than the people that stay. So for my family, my sister and I, we had to go to college. And in those times, the most important thing was to be an engineer. And so when I entered college, I went to engineering school. And a month later, I went to my dad and says, Papa, I don't understand a word of the whole thing. I had to change to something else because I really don't understand that. And there was no things in those times like you went to college and you choose what you wanted to study. You started to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer, but that was it. You didn't choose things. So I went to architecture school because it was the closest that had art in it and things like that.
Oh.
So while I was there, I met other cartoonists and I published, but there was not enough to make by then I knew that I was going to be a cartoonist because that's what I loved the most. So by then I decided I have to go to the United States, even though I don't speak any language, but that's where all the magazines that I'm reading now are. There were cartoon Saturday Evening Post and all in the magazines. So I have to go there. And I had to flip a coin because it was going to be Europe or the United States. So the United States was. So I took a bus, went to New York with a portfolio full of published with cartoons and originals and things. And no money whatsoever. I had about $20 when I arrived to the States. No English. Didn't know anybody over there in New York. Nobody. And every magazine I went, they didn't like it. They said, "What is this? There's no words in it." And in the early times, in the 60s, the magazines in the United States didn't use pantomime cartoons, just cartoons with words every time. And when they publish a cartoon without words, in the bottom it says, "No words, cartoon with no words." It was a very difficult task. And everybody says, "You have to go to Mad Magazine." But I knew Mad. I was a fan of Mad. And I knew they were not going to like it because they didn't publish anything of what I did or all. But so many editors of the small magazines told me, this is not for us. You have to go to MAD. Obviously, I went to MAD first day, and that was it. They liked it. I sold a lot of stuff for them, and I never left. That was in '62. So that's the beginning, really. And the comics, that's a different matter. By then I was getting more familiar with American comics because I was learning English, and I was reading all the things that Bill Gaines, the publisher of Mad Magazine, had at his office. You know, all the horror books and the whole easy line. So I started meeting all the cartoonists from Mad who were doing comics also from the beginning, from Bill Gaines to everybody, Jack Davis, Al Jaffe. All of them came from the comic book world. And that's how I started becoming more familiar with the genre. And then I went to Europe because I wanted, by now I was making pretty good money. And I went there for over 2 years to meet the cartoonists and to meet the publishers and all that. So it was terrific. I published over there, met everybody who was then starting and being good at it, you know, like Moebius and all the guys. It was terrific. Come back to MAD, and I asked for Joe Orlando, who was a cartoonist from Mad Magazine, but was also, and they said, well, he doesn't work here anymore. Why? He says, because he's now an editor at DC Comics.
Oh, yes.
So I went to him. Hey, long time, yeah, but I was in Europe, blah, 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 blah. And he was with an artist there. And says, I'm going to launch with, right now, many names just escape out of my head. But stay, come with us and have lunch. So I was preparing for that. And he told me he's waiting for the writer to come with the stories for a comic book called Young Romance that was started in the 40s by the King, you know, by
Jack Kirby.
By Jack Kirby. And I said, and he hasn't arrived? No, and the artist is here. He came all the way from New Jersey and he needs the material. And so I told him, well, why don't you go for lunch? And when you come back, I'll give you the 2 stories. Oh, terrific. They didn't ask me if I have ever worked on comics or anything. They left. So I went to there was a internal library at DC. I looked at all books of Young Romance, and I realized the plot was very basic. Girl meets boy, boys meet girl, they fight, she cries, he comes back, and everything is fine. So this is so simple. So instead of writing with a typewriter, I draw in an 11x8 the story, very loose, with a very loose dialogue because my English was terrible. But I wrote the story my way that I write grew sometimes, you know, with very little words. And they came back, I gave them, and they love it. And Joe says, geez, I didn't know you wrote comics, you know. He says, well, neither did I. This is the first work I have ever done. What? You give me more. You know? So I start writing, not drawing. I start writing for Jerry Lewis, Inferior 5. And then I wanted to sell little cartoons. I'd start doing one-page cartoons for Army, for Joe Kubert, War Comics, The House of Mystery, The Witching Hour. And that was how I started in the comics. But by then I was working as a cartoonist for Mad Magazine. But the comics, that was my beginning as a writer. And then as an artist writer. It's so strange.
So you wrote your way into being an artist at DC.
Correct. So I'm a writer that draws his stories.
That's
And
great.
of course, with Mark Evanier has been a lifesaver for Gru, you know, I mean, with their dialogues and things, you know. But then what I have learned in Europe was that I could do comics, because the majority of comics in Europe were humor. Superheroes was never in Europe at all whatsoever. They had adventure, they have barbarians, they have Tarzan, they have science fiction, they had everything. But superheroes is a subject that is not interest then. Now probably is very strong. But humor was strong, and there was a lot of comics, Asterix, Tintin, Lucky Luke, enormous amount of humor. I said, I can do my own comic. You see?
Uh-huh.
So I started thinking what I could do. And by the time I thought about doing all kinds of things, but my process was what there isn't there. And there was no barbarian humor. So I thought, I'm going to do a barbarian comic. So I started. This was in the late 60s, in the late 60s, 68, 67. And I thought about Gru. And I come to the States, and I went to the companies, because I knew a lot of the people, and says, I want to do my own comic. And says, sure, I mean, of humor. And but I want to keep the copyright. Ha ha, Sergio, that's impossible. In the United States, the companies keep the copyright. And says, not in Europe. Every cartoonist is the owner of his own material, and I want to be the owner of my material. Says, never happen. It will never happen. So it took me from the late 60s to 83 to publish my own comic, which I owe. It was one of the first comics ever published by a big company, owned by the author. They had to change the name of the companies, you know, but they did it. So it was in Pacific Comics, yeah, long time ago, 83.
Wow.
And I'm still the owner, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Gru is a pioneer, yeah.
In so many ways.
Yeah.
Well, I think I asked you before, or you answered before. I even asked you, are you a comic fan yourself? Are you?
No, not really. I like the medium a lot, you know. But for instance, I have never grown up with. It happened something very special with superheroes. The United States had never had a war at home, you know, international war.
Yeah.
In Europe, they had a lot of wars, pretty bad ones. Countries were completely devastated. Superheroes never came to save them. So there's not in their thinking about it coming somebody to helping out, because everybody had to help themselves to rebuild. You know, so there's a lot of heroes over there that they are normal people that do things good, you know, I mean, adventures, like Maltese, all the adventures. But the superhero never enter in the realm of a need for them.
Mm.
United States was very good at being superheroes, helping everybody. In Europe, the war, everything. They became very popular.
Earlier this week, we watched a documentary in my class where they talked about the fact that Superman was never depicted going overseas to fight in World War II because there really wasn't a Superman. So we can't, because he'd finish the war in 2 pages. You know, if the war were a comic, it'd be done.
Yeah. So I never grew up with superheroes at all.
Yes.
One of the biggest attraction to me has been the short story. You know, that to tell, and one of the guys who were terrific at that field was Will Eisner. So The Spirit was probably my favorite comic of all times. in Mexico, because in 7 pages, he told a complete story, and a good one. And he was terrific. See, my favorite literature has been always short story, you know, Henry, Borges, Twain, and Chesterton, Chekhov, Eisner, among the top guys. Because I read it and in short time. So when I did comics, that's what I do. It's short stories, you know, and but that was basically it. Not superheroes, but what I do, you know.
What inspires you when you create characters or stories? Where do your ideas come from?
From where the same place yours come from, you know. No, there's no special thing. It's it becomes something so natural that you have to write about a character, and then you transport yourself as the character, you know, what this guy will do based on that. I can write stories about anything because it's just a matter of, because I don't forget that I write humor. It's a big difference between writing a normal story and writing humor. For a normal story, a Western, there's always a basic story. The guy's here, something happens, he goes for revenge, and he succeeds. That's it. Same thing with others. Something happens, the detective goes there, solves the case, and that's it. The way he solves it is different, the murder is different. The Western, it's a girl, it's a boy, they kill the family, they kill the town, they whatever. But there are certain things. So you can write from the start without worrying about the ending, because the story will immediately develop to the ending. A guy is a detective, finds a guy dead with beaten by 1,000 bees. So he goes and tries to find out where the bees is, and then he realizes that the ant had a honey store, and that's where the bees came. Boom, the ending. With humor, you have to have a joke at the end, a funny joke, a different solution. So we write from the end. You have to find a great solution. So you write a story to arrive to that end.
So you're almost writing backwards.
Correct. Well, that's what I do. Because if you don't have a funny ending, there's no point to have the story. And that's the mistake of many television shows and many stories that try to write humor. They try to write it a normal way, and they don't have endings. All the in Saturday Night Live, they never had an ending of the sketches because they are not really humorous. They don't think of a funny joke and then they write the story to arrive to that conclusion. Suddenly they're doing something very funny, slapping, blah, 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 and ta-da, that's the end. No. To write good humor, you have to have a good solution. So when you arrive, you laugh, oh my God, that's the thing that you want.
Yeah.
So you have to prepare, you get in the story, you think a lot, and what happens is practice makes better, practice, you become better. The more you do it, the easier it becomes, like everything else. So it's, that's it.